Like most Monday mornings, you don't feel good. You don't feel good about getting out of bed or getting motivated. You don't have the strength to go to work. Like all Monday mornings, you're irritable, anxious, stressed by the overbearing start of the week. A passing tiredness? Not necessarily. Get a medical. You might be suffering from MMDT, Monday morning dysphoric trouble. Irritability, feeling run down, social withdrawal, headaches. Monday morning dysphoric trouble is an incapacitating illness that French researchers have just discovered. Monday morning dysphoric trouble affects 1 adult out of 3. It can ruin your life, so fight back. Ask your doctor for advice. Anti-Flemix 20 milligrams. Stop Monday mornings being a nightmare. There, you see? Took less than 40 seconds to almost convince you were sick, the victim of a new, recently discovered illness. You were even about to go out and buy the invented medicine from the fake laboratory for a bogus illness. Just a joke in bad taste? Don't be fooled. There are thousands out there who regularly swallow pills for completely fictitious illnesses invented by pharmaceutical companies. Oh yes, it's true. Laboratories that seem to have one single objective: to sell ever more medicine. The experts describe this as illness shaping, an annoying tendency the pharmaceutical industry has indulged in for more than 15 years. It needs saying that between the laboratory's influence and the demands of patients, the 21st century doctor is somewhat stuck in the middle. Especially since new illnesses have sprung up in recent years all over the place. Even a belly, those few extra kilos around the waist, are now considered serious and known as abdominal obesity. Luckily, it can be cured. This week we'll be looking at abdominal obesity, which is a real name given to a well-rounded and ever-growing belly by the medical profession. That was 4 years ago. At the time, abdominal obesity, scientifically known as metabolic syndrome, is a novelty. An illness with serious consequences that affects 1 in 4 people. It's a topic picked up by the media. Doctors have a name for all of these symptoms. It's metabolic syndrome. Let's just consider nutritional problems, which are very important. 2 months ago, Sophie went on a diet and lost 7 kilos. Yet she continues to suffer from metabolic syndrome. This morning, we're talking with Damien about metabolic syndrome, which simply means having a large belly. Abdominal obesity is an illness that is connected with being overweight and associated with diabetes, hypertension, and cholesterol. It needs to be treated at once to avoid the risk of cardiovascular accidents. In short, a public health priority. Dr. Boris Hansel is someone who seems to know and talk the most about the disease. He's an endocrinologist at a major Paris hospital and heads up a small unit dedicated to eradicating metabolic syndrome. On TV, as on the internet, Dr. Hansel seems committed to this public health drive. How do I recognize metabolic syndrome? Do you have metabolic syndrome? Can't you tell just by looking at yourself? Belly alert. Everyone should measure their waistlines. To fight metabolic syndrome, Boris Hansel recommends physical exercise, a balanced diet, and also, as an article in the Parisian newspaper put it in March 2008, an Accomplia pill, a medicine aimed to fight obesity produced by Sanofi. For my part, I would only prescribe this drug to people suffering from these symptoms, what we also call metabolic syndrome, as it endangers the life of the patient. Boris Hansel is not the only one to promote Sanofi's products. In Canada, the same story. The man who discovered the disease, Professor Jean-Louis Despres, the chairman of the International Metabolic Syndrome Group, also plugs Accomplia's active component drug, rimonabant. This drug is the first to specifically attack the anomalies of metabolic syndrome. A dose of 20 milligrams a day of ribonamat will significantly reduce the bad and harmful abdominal fat around the waist. When rimonabant becomes available on the market, we will finally have a truly effective treatment which will attack the cause of these complications. As this internal Sanofi document indicates, Accomplia seemed at the time to be one of the possible treatments for metabolic syndrome. Sanofi discovered the active ingredient of the medicine, rimonabant, in 1995. It's a new drug that shrinks the waistline and reduces metabolic risks such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol. It's a medicine they hope will conquer the world market, and Sanofi launches a powerful advertising campaign around the globe. To Professor Philip Evan, the only thing missing was the Archangel's trumpets. Every 2 months, there was an article on how Accomplia would usher in remarkable progress. It was like the Annunciation. Like the arrival of the crib on Christmas Day. It's coming, here it is, there it goes. It was quite astonishing. In reality, metabolic syndrome, the danger of too fat a belly, never really existed. The independent doctors of the Prescrire Review plainly wrote back in 2006 that metabolic syndrome was just a scientific bluff. Metabolic syndrome is a series of little problems that we were made to believe could hide something far more serious. In the bright sunshine of Toronto in Canada, a scientist who studied these problems in tremendous detail agrees to be interviewed. Epidemiologist Andrew Menti says metabolic syndrome is just a mix of high blood pressure, cholesterol, and diabetes, and being overweight. 4 known illnesses repackaged in a meaningless way, or how to make the old appear new.
And what we found was that for metabolic syndrome itself, the risk of a heart attack had an odds ratio of 2.69, so about 2.7. But if you look over here, these are components of the metabolic syndrome, and we found that 2 of the components, diabetes alone or hypertension alone, were equally as effective in predicting future heart attack. We can simply be targeting each of these component factors and treating those factors rather than trying to diagnose people as having metabolic syndrome.
According to Andrew Menti's study, metabolic syndrome would not provoke a greater chance of heart attack than the 4 known risk factors, which are diabetes, hypertension, excess weight, and cholesterol. But why believe him more than anyone else?
The InterHeart study was a large case control study conducted in 52 countries around the world in over 200 centers on all 5 inhabited continents.
27,000 people across 52 countries. The Canadian study is used as the yardstick the world over. Philippe Evan comes to the same conclusion. Metabolic syndrome is just hot air. You can't add up risks from illnesses. They're the same. Treating 4 illnesses and calling them metabolic syndrome for someone who has just one of them is nothing short of a swindle. And yet the ad campaign was real enough. The best thing is to start worrying early, because the abdominal obesity syndrome, as you've called it, is about having a large waistline, but not necessarily associated with the little troubles that might even pass unnoticed if not looked at jointly. Frankly, the message worked. Journalists thought they were educating the public about something important, but again, the reality appears to be quite different. Time to pay Dr. Boris Hansel another visit. The interview was in the kitchen of his medical unit in the major Paris hospital. As far back as 2006, even before Acomplia was on the market, the Prescriber Review, which is widely read by doctors, wrote that metabolic syndrome didn't exist. There was a serious scientific discussion. Everyone agreed that metabolic syndrome did increase the risk. There was consensus on how to diagnose it and what the diagnostic criteria were. We know that abdominal fat provokes illnesses. No one disputes that. No one disputes that. Well, that's radical. There was another study in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, carried out in 52 countries and with 27,000 patients, which is, in my opinion, one of the largest studies ever. And it states there is no more risk from metabolic syndrome than there is from diabetes, cholesterol, arterial pressure, and abdominal fat, the 4 factors that could have serious health effects. By associating these 4 factors, you get metabolic syndrome, but it's not really more serious. You're right. First of all, you're right to point out that there are disagreements in the scientific studies. They are serious scientific discussions. What everyone has agreed about is that metabolic syndrome causes metabolic disturbances. Secondly, everyone is agreed that metabolic syndrome increases cardiovascular risk. No. Oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Wait. You said it increased risks, and they say exactly the opposite. No. Yes. Yes, they do. It's a question of statistics. Do we adjust based on the known traditional factors? It's important for patients to know there is no more risk, it says. I repeat. It depends on the statistics you want to use. Sanofi's Acomplia drug is approved in 2007, not only for treating obesity, but also for people who are overweight and suffer from hypertension, diabetes and cholesterol, all symptoms of metabolic syndrome, the fictitious illness. In fact, within an 18-month period, Acomplia caused side effects in more than 1,000 patients in France, notably serious psychiatric problems. According to one French medical agency, Acomplia was responsible for 385 cases of depression, of which 125 were serious. 69 patients admitted suicidal tendencies. According to the agency, Acomplia caused 10 deaths, of which 4 were suicides. Alerted, the European Medicines Agency in London bans the sale of Acomplia. A year and a half after its launch, it's banned also in France. Soon the ban extends to the rest of the world. It's a tremendous blow to Sanofi. The director of the laboratory is fired, blown away by the enormity of the failure. Ruth Trojman didn't wait for the drug to be taken off the market to stop taking it. She'd felt the side effects just a few days after beginning a course of the drug in 2007. Depressions, she says, quickly set in. She agrees to talk about her traumatic descent into hell. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I was anxious. Felt like my heart would explode in my chest. And the fear, like being a hunted animal. You can be anxious without being scared. But I was terrified, like an animal that's being hunted, followed, that will be trapped. It could have killed me if I didn't have the presence of mind, the instinct for survival that told me, stop this treatment. Something might have happened to me. Was this the worst you'd ever felt? I never felt worse. Never. If a study published by the prestigious British scientific and medical review The Lancet is to be believed, Sanofi knew perfectly well the dangers of the side effects from clinical tests. The people who tested the medicine were 2.5 times more likely to stop the testing because of depression than those who took a placebo. Despite the alarm signals, the health authorities preferred Sanofi's version of events, and it was the patients who paid the price. The problem is who should be given the benefit of the doubt. Traditionally, it's been given to the medicine. The company has usually claimed that it's not significant, but not proved. That it's the medicine, then production shouldn't be stopped, and it should be put on the market, and eventually a decision would be made. That was the usual reasoning. In London, on the 19th of June 2006, the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, had been the first to authorize the sale of a Complia inside the EU. Was the serious nature of the side effects something that the agency had failed to notice? Did the scientific experts close their eyes to make a favorable decision on behalf of the laboratory? In the heart of the city, on the banks of the Thames, the EMA's science boss, Dr. Eichler, agrees to an interview.
I think it was one of the biggest mistakes of the EMA giving the authorization to that so dangerous drug.
I don't think it was a mistake.
Right.
What we need to understand is that drugs behave in one way in clinical trials. And it turned out that in the clinical trials, the benefit risk was positive. In other words, there was not a great, but a helpful weight loss observed in those patients. And we knew there were side effects, but they were in an order of magnitude where you could conclude that some patients would benefit. Therefore, we gave it a green light.
The experts at the Prescrire review had expected a red light, as they had serious doubts. They had asked for access to the study that had led to a Complia being authorized for sale. The agency sent them this document, which has been largely blacked out. Was the agency trying to hide something?
Well, that's 68 page of the study, so that's good. But when you just watch that, it's all in black.
Okay.
It's
no.
What do you think about it?
This was
black like that.
This was a mistake.
Mistake of
Ours.
yeah.
Yeah.
And why? Why did you do this mistake?
Someone made a mistake within our organization. If today Prescrire or anybody else asks us for the full data set of clinical trials that we have in-house, we would give it to them, provided there is no personal data issue.
This mistake have been committed because the EMA want to hide the truth about Rimonabant?
No, this was the mistake of one individual that is very regrettable.
But why did it do that? What is the answer?
It was probably a case of incompetence more than EMA not being willing to give out data.
Just incompetence?
Yes.
The European agency agrees to provide an uncensored copy. This time, the 68-page document is clearly legible. Inside are the precise details about the side effects of accomplices from attempted suicides, panic attacks, delirium, and in some cases, aggressive behavior, including sexual attacks. If in London they haven't seen what depression can do, then where are those who promoted the drug in the first place? Why didn't Dr. Dupré, who took part in the clinical tests, ring the alarm bells? An article dating back to 2007 might provide part of the answer. It's $15 million. That's what Dr. Dupré, the man who discovered abdominal obesity, was granted by Sanofi to set up a prestigious research foundation whose aim, fundamentally, was to highlight the syndrome. An agreement the doctor prefers to forget.
They
financed the foundation at the beginning, and it was aimed at finding out more about obesity. How much? About $1 million or so a year. Over how many years? Over 5 years, from 2005 to 2009. So not 15 million then. Well, it depends. There were several budgets. There was budget for education, university, for our website, and for the activities of the foundation. $15 million from Sanofi. Accepting money from laboratories is always risky. And today, for the first time, Professor Desprez looks back at his involvement with a pharmaceutical company and regrets it didn't heed his warnings. When we carried out the study, where we tested rimonabant, we noticed the risk of depression was doubled. What I would have liked is to have made sure any patient susceptible to depression be eliminated from the tests. Did you mention that, or at least warn them? Of course, everywhere, in scientific podiums, but I'm not the one who goes around with a briefcase trying to sell rimonabant, you understand? I talked about it at conferences based on what the company was saying. It seems to me you were in the company's pocket and they used your studies because you are the authority on obesity and they wanted to market this product. It's a pity. You think so too? Of course, it is a pity. It's bad luck. Do you say to yourself, I was abused by the pharmaceutical industry? Yes. I do, yes. Abused, betrayed. It's not clear whether the doctor regrets the $15 million generously provided by Sanofi to his institute dedicated to the belly syndrome. Doctors used by the pharmaceutical firms and who outwardly defend the interests of the companies that are pulling the strings behind the scenes. The laboratory, in a written statement, says it took all the necessary procedures at the time. Yet if the company had been able to afford the services of the Canadian specialist, they might also have conducted other communication campaigns. France, the expert on abdominal obesity, is Dr. Hansel. He's the one who recommended Accomplia in the Parisian newspaper to patients suffering from the metabolic syndrome. He also wrote a book on the subject. He forgot, however, to mention in his book that it had been co-published with Sanofi. And that leads to yet more questions, including whether he really did sever his links to the company. I'm curious, because you were obviously suggesting physical exercise, eating better, stressing less, while at the same time you're in partnership with Sanofi, a pharmaceutical laboratory. Why weren't you linked with a shop that sells sports clothes or sells organic food for a better diet? I was never in partnership with Sanofi. I don't know where you got that from. Well, your book was paid for by Sanofi, wasn't it? The book was published by Hachette, and 5,000 copies were acquired by Sanofi, who did nothing with them, by the way. For statutory reasons, they didn't want to distribute them, so as not to give the impression they were directly involved with the book. But by buying 5,000 copies, I imagine Sanofi allowed Hachette to go ahead with the book. It probably covered all the expenses, yours and Hachette's, and allowed the book to be published. Well, what's true is that at the time, Sanofi wanted to develop the medicine and present it as a cure for abdominal obesity. Exactly, that's what we're interested in. So they were happy that metabolic syndrome was being talked about. Do you ever feel that you were being used by Sanofi? For example, Sanofi gave you an award for your internet site on belly syndrome, as well as 23,000 euros for the research you'd conducted into stress and metabolic syndrome. The impression is that Sanofi wanted to make the most of your reputation. To be clear, as far as I'm concerned, and everyone who knows me or knows my work are also aware, I always follow the same line. If others are then interested, then that's their business. So, it's not just the book that links the doctor and Sanofi. To recap, for his work on belly syndrome, Dr. Hansel received 23,000 euros from Sanofi. He also received an award for his educational website, also from Sanofi. Last January, his theories were sponsored by Sanofi. The list gets longer, yet the professor insists that Sanofi's support was disinterested. So how will he react to the now infamous presentation in 2007 that recommends a Complia to treat metabolic syndrome? Be honest, Sanofi made the link between belly syndrome and a Complia every time it had a chance to deal with doctors in this regard. Yes, they did do that, but I can assure you I know nothing about it. It's abnormal because I'm not familiar with that presentation. Let's take a look. Here it is. Look, Acomplia and metabolic syndrome. I haven't seen this, ever. You've never seen this document? That, I've never seen it. Your name's mentioned. I spoke about metabolic syndrome. If they then sold more of the medicine, that's not my doing. I might have benefited indirectly without thinking of it. If they rushed in and mentioned what I wanted. You say they took advantage of me to talk about what they wanted. It's true. Yes, you're right. That's how I see it. With serious side effects, too. In France, 9 out of 10 people say they trust their doctors. The family doctor, the one we've known since we were small, and is worthy of our trust, or at least usually. But can we still trust their diagnosis? Marcia Angel can answer that one. The former publisher of the New England Journal of Medicine, the Bible of the independent medical press, and today a professor at Harvard, she says trust is no longer possible.
If a drug company wants as big a market as possible, the company will promote conditions that affect almost everyone. There's much more money in doing that than in making drugs to treat serious medical conditions that affect a relatively small number of people. And if you look at these diseases that they're marketing, they're diseases that are fairly ill-defined. And they're diseases that affect mainly fairly normal people. And they can convince people that a lot of people have this disease, then their market gets bigger. And sometimes they create medical conditions. Sometimes they just expand the boundaries of existing conditions. But either way, their market gets bigger.
Extending the perimeter of an illness? What was uncovered during this documentary is surprising. Laboratories that continue to push the limits and lower the very thresholds of diagnosis. Their aim is to treat as many patients as possible and for as long as possible. A study carried out in the United States shows how, just by changing a comma or a digit, the number of patients can increase significantly. Take diabetes, which before was diagnosed if one had 140 milligrams or more of blood sugar per deciliter of blood. Then in 1997, a WHO committee lowered the threshold to 126 milligrams, and in one fell swoop, 1.7 million more Americans suddenly became diabetic. The same is true of cholesterol. In 1998, the threshold went from 240 to 200, and 42.6 million people in the USA alone, and an 86% increase in clients for the pharmaceutical companies.
It seems now that there are only two kinds of people in the world, those who have medical conditions and those who don't know it yet. And that's what the drug companies are working on.
In Geneva, these people may not know they are ill. Osteoporosis is a well-known disease that weakens bones, and today it's World Osteoporosis Day. To alert, measure, and detect the disease, the organizer of this event has broken the piggy bank. The woman looking for information is Giselle Val. In no time at all, the volunteer worker will ask her to complete a lengthy questionnaire. What kind of questions did you ask, madam? Well, with the Frax test, you can calculate the risk over the next 10 years. The risk of what? Of bone fractures. No time to think, it's off to the bone mobile. Inside, a sacred object, the bone densimeter, a machine that's worth several tens of thousands of euros that takes x-rays of bones. The objective is to measure bone density. In the fight against osteoporosis, this exam is decisive. Careful though, if the machine says your bones are weak, then you are at risk. That's, from what I see, the column from top to bottom. Then the exam is just to see whether you've had any fractures of the vertebrae in your life. Not that I know of. Not that you know of. But I think you may have done in these vertebrae. This one is lower in the front than in the back, as if it had been squashed. The test's great advantage is that it helps determine the kind of treatment that's needed to help rebuild the bone. It's an important test as it helps decide whether the patient needs medicine. And effectively, the pharmaceutical industry is never far behind. On the truck are the companies that are helping finance the campaign. It's almost like a major sports event. The same sponsors one finds in almost any brochure aimed at the general public. And in the midst of this awareness campaign, a woman in dark glasses who seems to be avoiding the limelight. Are you part of the organization?
No.
No, I'm the sponsor. Who is the sponsor? Amgen. It's a pharmaceutical company. Do you make medicine for osteoporosis? Yes. Is it an important part of your business in terms of turnover? It's a new treatment, so it's a little early to tell. Is this sponsorship an important financial investment? Or is it just a few thousand euros and nothing special? Well, we don't comment about that. It's confidential. No comment, probably, because in this business there's so much at stake. The financial risks are considerable. But what is osteoporosis exactly? The much talked about illness is when bones deteriorate. The older we get, the weaker they become. The result is the compression of vertebrae and the risk of spontaneous fractures. Look at this osteoporosis informational film, broadcast along the lines of a scary movie. One woman in 3 will suffer from osteoporosis, leading to fractures that could prove fatal. If you know there's a danger that threatens you, wouldn't you do something to stop it? 1 woman out of 3, fatal, danger, numbers and words and music meant to scare you. The fear of illness, a sentiment that laboratories exploit to the full these days. And to Ray Moynihan, this systematic practice must be stopped. Disease-mongering is something the Australian journalist is very familiar with. He's been monitoring it and the pharmaceutical companies for 15 years. He's noticed that the best sales occur when the companies instill fear. In fact, it's the key to their strategy.
Sadly, I think the marketing of fear has become central to much drug company marketing. The fear of getting old, the fear of having a sexual difficulty, the fear of having a fracture, the fear of having a heart attack, the fear of your children being suicidal, the fear of your children not succeeding at school. And these fears are used in order to turn healthy people into patients.
Osteoporosis becomes a bigger and bigger global health problem.
Osteoporosis is a silent disease that could affect 3.3 million women, according to a French think tank. It's quite an epidemic, and yet some doubt whether it's real. Is aging a disease? Is that what you're asking? Osteoporosis is the aging of bones. It's the aging of skin. Are wrinkles a disease? The answer tends to be no. Everyone gets wrinkles fairly quickly, and everyone's bones get weaker as they get older.
Osteoporosis, the thinning of the bones, is a risk factor for future disease. It's a risk factor for future fracture. But it has been sold to the world as a silent killer disease that we must address and we must treat with drugs.
To define osteoporosis and treat it more effectively, the health authorities arbitrarily decided the reference should be the bone density of a 30-year-old woman. Not 60, not 40, but 30.
The bones of a young woman were taken as being normal, and that instantly classified large numbers of older women as being abnormal.
So every older woman, or every woman older than 30, is going to show some loss of bone mass. After a certain age, if you have a condition that everyone has, then it's a mistake to treat it like an illness, to take a drug for it.
This is a classic example of disease mongering, of turning ordinary life into medical conditions, and of turning ordinary people into potential patients.
A healthy woman whose doctor told her she was sick. That's what happened to Shirley Bowles.
United States District Court, Southern District of New York. Master file.
On the 8th of August 2011 in Florida, Shirley Bowles records her last will and testament, a moment captured on video by her lawyer. Seriously ill, she attacks Merck, the pharmaceutical company. Shirley Bowles takes the oath as she enters the fight of her life. For 8 years, the 73-year-old American had been taking Fosmax, a drug meant to fight osteoporosis. It's produced by Merck and sold throughout the world. Shirley suffered from necrosis of the jaw, a serious side effect of Fosmax. As her health worsens, her lawyer decides to record her will on camera. These are the last pictures of Shirley Bowles.
What was your understanding of why he prescribed Fosmax to you?
It was to strengthen your bones.
Now, did you follow Dr. Mills' advice?
On this medication, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Can you describe for us what pain you feel from these jaw problems?
It's like sometimes it'll start off like a terrible toothache, just really, and then it would begin with, would go like halfway, and then, you know, it'd go back the other way.
How often are you in pain, ma'am, from your jaw?
Every minute I'm awake.
The physical agony that consumes Shirley is therefore due to Fosamax, the anti-osteoporosis drug, which was sold beginning in 1995 by Merck Laboratories. Since then, an estimated 225 million people like Shirley Bowles have taken the drug. It's a successful medicine and one that brings in as much as $3 billion a year. Her family provided these pictures of Shirley Bowles. In 1997, Shirley is 59. Her doctor diagnoses she's at risk from osteoporosis and prescribes Fosamax. And she takes the drug for 8 years. But the medicine never took care of Shirley. Instead, it ate away at her jaw little by little.
What does the word fistula mean to you?
It means an opening, a hole, sore.
Do you have any?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Videographer, you could kind of zoom in on Mrs. Bowles' face and chin. Can you point to your fistulas for the jury, please, ma'am?
Okay, the very first one was underneath here. The second, oh, they sort of went in rows.
a serious infection of the jawbone for an illness she never had. During trial, some compromising emails were produced in court. In them, employees of Merck suggested tampering with studies that showed a link between Fosamax and the case of necrosis of the jaw. In another email, the director of the clinic flatly refuses to pursue a study on the side effect. Shirley Bowles' lawyer is visibly angered by the correspondence when he cross-examines a Merck executive.
He writes to you, how about if we, A, keep on the lookout for MSGs with potential in this area, B, pass them on to the type of intra-Merck ONJ organization, Monjo, right, that you outline below for vetting, C, tweak out something that looks good, and D, search out the money. Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly.
Is this how it works at Merck? Is this how it works, that you guys got a Monjo hit squad that looks for potential studies and then tweaks them out so they look good to Merck? Is that how it works?
Dr. Kimmel made several proposals. Those are his proposals. I mean, that's all I can be sure of in terms of what he meant by that statement.
Tim O'Brien is Shirley Bowles' lawyer, and for the first time he implicates the pharmaceutical giant Merck as the Fosamax drug is accused of being responsible for the side effects.
Merck knew for years that it had to study this. And here we are years later, and it has still not conducted one study, one single study, to systematically address the relationship between Fosamax and osteonecrosis of the jaw.
It's too great a risk, and it's precisely what the jury in New York decides in the Shirley Bowles case. Merck has fined $1.5 million in damages. And this for an illness she contracted while treating an illness that she never had. But money can't cure everything. On the 4th of September 2011, Shirley Bowles dies due to complications of necrosis of the jaw. Despite the verdict, Merck continues to insist its drug is effective and brings genuine benefits to the patient. It reduces the risk of fractures by a half, it says. This Merck laboratory document has the same claim, that the medicine reduces by 51% the chances of a broken hip. To check Merck's claims, AFSAPS, the French Agency for the Safety of Health Products, was approached and their findings were clear-cut. On its own website, the agency stated it came to the same result, namely that there was a 51% reduction in the risk of a broken hip. The aim is to reduce the risk of fractures by 50%. And it matches the figures we have for the drug that limit bone mass loss. Two different sources, one message, which is reassuring, other than the fact that after the inquiry we discovered the source for the French agency's information was Merck. The French agency was basing its results purely on the laboratory studies of the company that produced the medicine. Yet even more serious was a report commissioned by the FDA, the American Food and Drugs Administration, which revealed a dirty tricks campaign. It states the risk of fractures is reduced by half due to the drug. But if the report is studied carefully, then it can be seen the natural risk is minimal, just 2%, as against 1% with Fosamax, an effectiveness that is purely relative. To be clear, if you take two people who have osteoporosis, Fosamax prevents one of them from suffering fractures. But stepping back a little, the reality is that only 2 people in 100 who have osteoporosis will have a fracture anyway. A very small number, but not a fact the laboratory wants to advertise. Of the 2 people out of 100 at risk, Fosamax will only save 1. Isn't somebody making fools out of us?
I think a lot of the marketing of the osteoporosis drugs has really oversold the benefits. For example, the world was told that Fosamax can cut the risk of fracture in half. It can cut your risk of hip fracture, let's say, by 50%. Now, that technically may be true, but in actual fact, if your risk is just 2% to start with, then it cuts it from 2% to 1%.
And according to the same FDA report, the medicine becomes dangerous after being administered for more than 3 years. Something else the drug company is reluctant to talk about. Fortunately, though, there's AFSAPS. Don't you feel misled by the figures being touted by the drugs companies that give the impression they reduce the risk of fractures by a half when the risk is really very small anyway? I don't know the numbers, so I can't tell you. It does seem small, though. Well, it's their opinion. Yes, I understand, but it seems small. I guess you have to see it also in perspective. How's it possible you don't know the numbers? Oh, wait, I'm not re-evaluating the whole of osteoporosis here. That's not what I'm doing. No. The other important information, it appears that after a certain time, the medicine does more harm than good. What do you think of those findings? It's still in the FDA report? I can't judge, I don't know it. Well, it's fairly clear that AFSAPS won't be much of a source for treatment of osteoporosis. In the meantime, the pharmaceutical companies can rejoice and make themselves at home in all our drugstores. But maybe not for that much longer. There are currently an estimated 1,700 lawsuits filed against Merck in the United States for necrosis of the jaw. This document, issued by the American Dentists Associations, the risk of osteonecrosis of the jawbone is 1 in 23, a little more than 4%. That's 6,000 times higher than Merck's official figures, which was once again picked up by AFSAPS. No one at Merck was available for interviews, so instead there's a conference in which they're participating in downtown Paris. Merck, like other drug companies, has a stand to show off its products during a scientific symposium on osteoporosis. Among the hors d'oeuvre and champagne is one of the company's salesmen. Hello, are you in charge of the Merck stand? Yes. Can we get information on what you're talking about here? I can't talk publicly. Is there someone in charge here from Merck? Not at the moment. Maybe later. Yes, of course, you can request a meeting. But not at the stand. No, there's just me here. Because we've asked many times for a meeting. We wrote, we sent emails, we phoned. Well, there shouldn't be any problem usually. Well, usually maybe not, but we've been asking for 3 months. 3 months and nothing. Well, listen, I'll pass on your request. Not authorized to talk. Okay, but she did say there'd be a Merck medical director in this room. Just need to find her. Excuse me, have you seen anyone from Merck here? Someone we can talk to? We're desperate. Over there, maybe. Yes, but she's a salesperson and can't talk to us, and we've been trying for 3 months to find someone who can answer our questions. I'm not from Merck, though. Do you know where they are? I saw some Merck people this morning. Do you know where they're going? No sign of Merck on the horizon, or is there? There is Professor Christian Roux, a specialist on osteoporosis. It's his osteoporosis research and information group, the GRIO, that is organizing this forum and welcoming drug companies with open arms. Look, some hors d'oeuvre over here and pamphlets from the Merck laboratory over there. Isn't it a problem when you organize an information day and all the drugs companies are just using you as a springboard for their products? I hope the doctors can put matters in perspective when it comes to all the various studies that are being presented here. You can see what's going on in the rooms. There's a lot of networking and information sharing. Yes, but it's a great platform for them. I think it's a chance for them to meet doctors and share results. Once again, though, the doctors need to stand back and keep a critical mind. Stand back, a critical mind. Christian Roux doesn't seem to have stood back when it came to all the propositions made by the laboratories that produce the osteoporosis drugs. Among the best known are Merck, of course, and then there's Servier, Lilly, Amgen, Novartis, Werth, and Roche. I don't want to embarrass you, but I see that you once worked for Merck, also for Servier, for Novartis, for Roche. I'll stop there. It's the truth, because I am closely involved in the management of osteoporosis. And therefore, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with industrial partners that develop the drugs in this field, but that doesn't stop me from talking about the limits of these medicines, their side effects, and the limits of what they can actually do. The many commercial ties that nevertheless don't stop the scientists from being independent. But on Griot's internet site, there's a page titled Osteoporosis in 100 Questions, which is financed by Lilly, the pharmaceutical firm. 100 questions is a lot. Except that there's not one question on the necrosis of the jaw, no question about the side effects. There are lots of questions of a positive nature. There are many questions on the environment and the kinds of questions that are asked during consultations about milk, physical exercise and medicines. But nothing about the side effects of the medicines, though. That's kind of awkward. It is awkward. It's always hard to draw up a list of the side effects for the general public. It can be counterproductive. It could scare people off. I think it should be part of the unique conversation between the doctor and his patient. The key is when the prescription is made out. Having said that, you're right. From the moment there's a site for the public, it's useful to have all the information gathered there. I'm asking you because the questionnaire has been prepared in partnership with Lilly, another pharmaceutical company. What does such a partnership mean? Did they pay for the brochure? So, originally the brochure was meant to be on paper and be distributed to doctors who wanted it through the intermediary of the laboratory. There were several illnesses, so they paid for the brochure? They paid to have it made. So they did pay for it, if you like. They paid for it, they made it, they distributed it. Yes. Don't you have a problem with that? No, not as long as there's editorial freedom. But that's just it, though, isn't it? What stopped you mentioning the side effects in the questionnaire if it was put together and paid for by the company? Listen, so as long as there's freedom... No, I'm trusting you with your answer here. No, look, so long as there's complete editorial independence, which was the case, so it was your call not to mention the side effects. It wasn't a brochure promoting medicines, and if you look at all the questions it had, to give more complete information on that particular question. But osteonecrosis of the jaw is a serious side effect. It is a serious side effect, but it's extremely rare. From 1%, it's down to about 1 in 50,000. What's amazing is that we have a Californian study that you must know since you specialize in osteoporosis. It's the study here. The study says something completely different. You have it, right? It says the risk is 4.3 in 100. Yes. So hardly 1 in 50,000, is it? It's 6,000 times higher than Merck's study, which is 3,000 times more than the number you've given us. And a risk of 4.3 in 100 for necrosis of the jaw is something to think about, isn't it? Of course. It's big. It is big. But they're the only ones with such a high rate. And the number you published is 1 in 100,000. That's the number several scientific companies have given, so I think it's been verified. The numbers have been compared. Right, but you can't tell me, you who were president of Griot for 5 years, that I think it's been verified. So why put out that figure and not any other? It seemed to be the average figure based on the various researchers. An average which suits the companies. For 6 months, no pharmaceutical company had agreed to be interviewed. Oh yes, the one response was this short note from Merck sent by registered post. It said that nothing was more important for Merck than the safety of its medicines, and that no risk of osteonecrosis has been reported during clinical tests. But there was no mention of Sally Bowles. Her case was possibly just not part of their marketing plan.